Welcome back to another episode of the Minds with Hakeem podcast. I'm your host, Jjuan Hakeem, coming to you today with a solo episode. I'm really excited about this episode. We're trying something different. We had a new segue into the podcast, and I really love this segue. This is my first go around at it, and hope you guys enjoy. So, the difference in this podcast is I run a book club, and with a group of guys who we read various books on faith, psychology, business, leadership, diet, you name it. We've read everything across the board, probably besides like fiction at this point. And I think we read pretty good books, and the group picked these books, and it's not just, oh, Juwan picked a book and we go forward. No, a lot of these guys chime in and pick different books. So, with that being said, I want to break down some of the books that we're reading on the podcast because it helped us grow a lot, whether we love the book or whether we don't like it. And there's various opinions. But yeah, so I'm going to break down the book today is How to Win Friends and Influence People. The only book you need to lead you to success. This is a very, very old book. And I say old, it's a lot of reviews out there on it, a lot of mixed reviews, mostly good, but it was copyrighted in 1936 by Dale Carnegie. I probably should have said his name at the beginning, but one of my friends, Caleb, I remember when we told him we was reading this book, he was just like, "Oh, that's a good one." My dad and my grandfather was like, "I'm glad y'all reading that book." So this book has been around for generations, and it's around for a reason. We enjoyed it. We had a good conversation over it. So I'm just gonna read a few excerpts on it and then kind of chime in the lessons that I've learned. And every chapter had a principle at the end of it. So it's 4 parts. I'll be going through the chapters really quick. I encourage you to read the book on your own, especially if you are already in leadership positions or going to leadership positions and you know that's where you want to be. Leadership is hard. And this book, have a lot of insights that I think we can use and learn from. So, before we get started, I got my notes here in front of me and the book ready to go. I do want to say just huge thank you to my cousin Jamarcus on the camera. He's learning. We're learning together of how to kind of do this podcast where we kind of got to learn on our toes. But appreciate him and appreciate the men of the book club who kind of recommended this book and broke it down with me. A lot of things that I'm going to share mostly come from them as well. So I shouldn't say mostly. Some of it come from them. And they were very helpful in getting me prepared for this podcast. And also should mention some of those guys will be on this podcast breaking down future books with me. So trying both ways, solo and with them as well, and keeping that not interview format, but two-person format that you're more familiar with. All right, that's enough about that. Let's get to the book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. The only book you need to lead you to success, by Dale Carnegie. All right. So part one, I'm going to break it down by parts before I dive into, and if you don't like page ruffling in the background of your podcast, I apologize in advance, but that's just kind of how we got to do it today. So part one really covers the chapter, the overwhelming chapter of part one is fundamental techniques in handling people. I know we all probably handle people daily. So whether that's your wife, your kid, your coworkers, if you manage people, this is essentially important to you at work. So fundamental techniques in handling people is part one. In the first chapter, I thought the first chapter is called If you want to gather honey, don't kick over the beehive, which I thought was a pretty cool chapter. But I know the first excerpt I wanted to read was on on page 5. It goes, John Wanamaker, founder of the stores that bears his name, once confessed, I learned 30 years ago that it is foolish to scold. I have enough trouble overcoming my own limitations without fretting over the fact that God has not seen fit to distribute evenly the gift of intelligence. Wanamaker learned this lesson early, but I personally had to blunder through this old word for for a third of a century before it even began to dawn upon me that 99 times out of 100, people don't criticize themselves for anything, no matter how wrong it may be. Criticism is futile because it puts a person on the defense, usually makes him strive to justify himself. Criticism is dangerous because it wounds a person's pride, hurts his sense of importance, and arouses resentment. I think this was the first excerpt I kind of notated down in my notes when I was reading because it focused on going inward. I love the part that it says, let me see where it is. 99 times out of 100, people don't criticize themselves for anything, no matter how wrong it may be. I think we're quick, especially in leadership positions, and in every position, honestly, but for my leaders out there, we're quick to point the blame on our team and not take extreme ownership of what is transpiring, whether it's at work or in household, etc., wherever you do all that. So I think before we criticize others, this huge lesson is to look inward. What could we have done to lead and guide that person a little better who failed us? And as Wanamaker would say, God has not seen fit to distribute evenly the gift of intelligence. So that's a big sentence because we don't know it all, so we can't expect others to know it all. You get what I'm saying? So I thought this was a pretty good lesson, real quick, on criticizing people. All right. Page 10 is my next excerpt from my notes. Oh, I actually wanted to read this from page 8. This one goes, let's realize that the person we are going to correct and condemn will probably justify himself or herself and condemn us in return. Or like the gentle Taft would say, I don't see how I could have done anything different from what I have. I think this is important because criticism, it forces others to close off. I know if my wife correct me or talk to me about something, I get quick to shut it down. And that's not healthy for a relationship. It's obviously not healthy for conversation. And that's just one example in my life. But I think being open to criticism and understanding there are more than one way to skin a cat is really important. But if you come to people and condemn right away, they're going to be closed off, most likely. So it's a way to have a conversation. Something we have to figure it out. All right. This is a quick letter from a general, to a general from Abraham Lincoln. So, my dear General, I do not believe you appreciated the magnitude of misfortune involving the Lee's escape. So this is, for a little context, this is during the Civil War. He was within our grasp, and to have closed upon him would, in connection with our late success, have ended the war. As it is, the war will be prolonged indefinitely. If you could not safely attack Lee last Monday, how can you possibly do so south of the river? When you can take with you very few, no more than 2/3 of the force you then had in hand? It would be unreasonable to expect, and I do not expect, that you can now effect much. Your golden opportunity is gone, and I'm distressed immeasurably because of it. The question from this was, what do you suppose Mehdi, I believe is the general's name, did when he read this letter? And I'll read the excerpt from the book. And it says, just a minute, maybe I ought not be so This is what Lincoln said before he sent the letter, because he never sent this letter off because it was very condemning. Just a minute, maybe I ought not be so hasty. It is easy enough for me to sit here in the quiet of the White House and order Mehdi to attack. But if I had been up at Gettysburg, and if I had seen as much blood as Mehdi had seen during the last week, and if my ears had been pierced with the screaming and the shearing of wounding and dying, and maybe I wouldn't be so anxious to attack either. If I had Mehdi's time and temperament, perhaps I would have done just what he had done. Anyhow, it is water under the bridge now. Lincoln, and I learned this from a good friend of mine, Saul, who's actually a member of our book club. He said one time he was leaving the job and he was very frustrated with how it ended. And his dad prompted him to, and he wanted to write a letter. His dad prompted him to, like, hey, write that letter. But after you write it, rip it up. Don't even send it off, because it does nobody any good at this point to tell them how horrible they're running their business, to tell them how horrible they're doing at whatever it may be, or to tell them how, in this situation, how miserably they fell in at this war, or on the decision that they made at this during this time of war. It's completely futile, and it's vanity at that point. So I think that's really powerful lesson for those of us out there who kind of get frustrated fast at our team, at our spouses, whatever, is to write it out. It's helpful to write it out, your frustration, but just keep that between you. And after you get it all out, because sometimes we just need to vent and get stuff off our chest, rip it up. It's out there for you to sit it on the table, and you kind of clearly expressed how you felt to yourself. And now you can rip it up and kind of respond in a more gentle, in a more less condemning way. Thought that was a really good letter. All right. So this excerpt, back to the book, is from, still in chapter 1. It's a small one. It said, when dealing with people, let us remember that we are not dealing with creatures of logic. We are dealing with creatures of emotion, creatures bristling with prejudice and motives and pride by vanity. A great man shows his greatness by the way he treats people under him, or little, or smaller than him, should I say. I think basically that's kind of what I'm just hitting on about, what I just kind of covered with the Lincoln letter. It's a very emotional when we condemn people. It's not a logic 1 + 1 = 2 conversation. It's 1 + 1 = 1, and why didn't we get that done type thing. And you pointing the finger and gouging people with it. So it's important to practice that self-control. And so the last excerpt in this section, I'm not going to read it because it's really long, and it hit me so hard because it's about fathers and looking, especially, and it's been happening from the beginning of time, but I see it more and more as I'm in my adulthood and being a father. It's called Father Forgets by W. Livingston Learned, and he basically wrote about how he's so hard on his son and how he expects his son to be competent and know the things that he know already at the beginning of life. And, our kids, they have so much to learn. And he's just condemning his son so much for school, for sports, and all this other stuff. And I see this, like, in real life, where fathers can't even eat dinner with their sons or their family because they want to talk about the game that Timmy had and how he didn't perform up to the standard of his father. So it's a really good excerpt. So if you get this book, it's on page 14 through 16, and it's really important, and it touched me so hard because it's something I've seen as a child when I was in school, something I've seen, not for myself, from the outside looking in, something I've seen as a coach by coaching kids, and something I've just, now I have the opportunity with the Birds of Titus to learn a different area of this important lesson, to not condemn our children and expect our children to have it all figured out. They're merely kids. So it's a really good excerpt from chapter 1. And the principle from chapter 1 is don't criticize, condemn, or complain, which I think it's pretty self-explanatory. None of those things help situations and where we operate in. So don't criticize, condemn, or complain. Principle 1. All right, back to the book. All right, chapter 2, The big secret of dealing with people. All right, where did we start at? So, just to set this tone for this chapter, I think this is where would be a good place to start for my notes. At least I thought. But Sigmund Freud, forget how to say his name, said that everything you and I do springs from two motives: the sex urge and the desire to be great. I would add to that, well, and he does add to it in the next section, but I would add to that from something I've seen in today's world. Like, yep, the desire to be the great is still hugely important, and the sex urge is hugely important in our culture, unfortunately. But I've seen, especially from my peers and stuff like that, that most people who don't have a higher power, which in this podcast preference definitely would be Jesus Christ. But with that being said, most people who don't cling to a religion and a higher source, a God that's beyond and above their being, they use sex or their body as that tool, and or business, in which that can go hand to hand, but I'm not saying it always go hand in hand. That's not a fair assessment. But with that being said, yes, that is true, but I would also add the motive of moving for Christ or God in general, but Christ, like I said, with this podcast, we push. So, but this is the desire to be important is the add-on. I think most of us want to be important and we want to make impact. It's part of the reason why I'm doing this podcast right now, because one of my life missions is to cut that light on for everybody and show them that there's hope at the end of the tunnel. But with that big mission that I have, it does kind of make myself feel, to myself only, a little bit important. I'm here for a reason. So, the big secret of dealing with people like me. So, I will excerpt on page 2 and 3. Sorry, I'm a very sloppy writer when I take notes. Well, when I write in general, so I have take me a minute to read my excerpts. But with that being said, I have the next excerpt is on page 23. It's from Charles Schwab. And Charles said, "I consider my ability to arouse enthusiasm among my people," said Schwab, "the greatest asset I possess. And the way to develop the best in that person is by appreciation and encouragement. There is nothing else that so kills ambition of a person as criticism from superiors. I never criticize anyone. I believe in giving a person incentives to work, so I am anxious to praise and loath to find fault. If I like anything, I am hearty in my appropriation and lavish in my praise." That was giving me a little whirlwind. "I am hearty in my appropriation and lavish in my praise." This is good. I think this is good for a lot of reasons, because look at the world that we're in. We need more appreciation and encouragement. Like, if you look on the internet, I mean, there is places where appreciation and encouragement resides, but it's overwhelmed by negativity and sex and other things that our generation don't need more of. We need more encouragement. We need more appreciation. So I pose a question. When is the last time you genuinely told somebody you appreciate them? When is the last time where one of your friends, family, co-workers were not feeling well and they were in the dumps and you genuinely encouraged them with no motive? That's a question for you to sit on. It's something we should always be doing. So I took a quote down from page 27, and it says, "Do not be afraid of the enemies who attack you. Be afraid of the friends who flatter you." Oh, yeah. I remember exactly why I took this one down. Kind of goes back to that question I just asked. When is the last time you genuinely encouraged someone? or genuinely showed appreciation from someone. That's important because flattery we can see through. We can see right through flattery, and you don't want to flatter people. I can tell when somebody is genuinely showing appreciation for me, and I can also tell when somebody is flattering me. And flattering is basically just trying to make somebody feel good and butter up because they can clearly see your motive. They can clearly see what you're going through. And I deal with that on the daily in my day-to-day work where, for those of you who don't know, I am the community relations director at Eden Crest here in the Des Moines Metro. And what I do is, it's a pretty crappy job, but I love it so much because I get to help people. What I do is I show the families or the resident who's looking for assisted living and or memory care, and I show them our community, show them the cost, show them what we can do, what we can provide, and stuff like that. But in that time frame, people are genuinely hurting, and they genuinely need real empathy. So my heart has to empathize with those people and show them, hey, I know it might be tough what you're going through, but I am here to help. So, and they can tell if I flatter them and butter them up, or they can tell if I'm genuinely concerned in what they're going through. Another quote said, flattery is telling the other person precisely what he or she thinks about themselves as well. Be on the lookout if you're doing this, because people can see it and people don't like that. And lastly, from chapter 2, I just wrote another quote down. Every man I meet is my superior in some way, in that I learn from him. That is important because when I was at my worst point, retiring from hoops, which is the reason why this podcast exists today, is I needed to learn more because I identified so strongly as a basketball player, which I was so much more than that and am so much more than that. But I wanted to learn from others. It doesn't matter what they did, and it's still today. I don't care what you do. I can have a conversation with anybody on this podcast platform, anybody, because I genuinely know that everybody is my superior, and I can learn something from them if I open up. That quote had me on fire. Principle 2. Give honesty and sincere appreciation. We kind of already went over that. On to chapter 3. Back to the book. So, all right. So I started this off with a quote, but I want to read this chapter. He who can do this has the whole world with him. He who cannot walk a lonely way. My first quote from this chapter, I'm trying to digest that chapter title right now. So, the only way on earth to influence other people is to talk about what they want to show and them how to get it. So, the only way to influence other people is to talk about what they want and show them how to get it. Kind of read that horribly the first time. This comes with awareness. I want to take this time to talk about awareness because there are people, and I've been both of these people that I'm going to explain. There are people that dominate conversation and don't leave a breath for no one to say anything. You've got to have awareness because I'll tell you right now, and I've gotten this feedback, you're probably annoying the crap out of the person you're talking to. And you're not influencing that person at all. They probably think you're dingus the more and more you talk. And the other person is, they die to themselves so much that they don't even jump into the conversation. I've been in that situation a lot. And you're not adding any value to that person or yourself by just being a fly on the wall most times. Now, I'm not saying don't listen, because listening is very important. But there's a way to communicate, and there's a way to influence people at work, at home. We're all an influence, and I think sometimes influence can be looked at as bad. Like, if you genuinely think you're doing this for the right reason, trying to influence others to walk that line of path with you, it's not a bad thing. Like, people look at it as manipulation or yada, yada, yada. We're all under influence. Like, I had to influence my wife to marry me. Is that a bad thing? No. But I had to kind of sell myself to her. Like, hey, I think I'm the guy for you. Fortunately enough for me, that worked out. All right. On to the next. I feel bad every time I turn the page. All right. Time to go to kindergarten. Tim goes to kindergarten. Told you I have a hard time at reading my notes. All right. Got an excerpt from chapter 3. Another example of persuading comes from Stan Novak of the Cleveland, Ohio, a participant in our course. Stan came home from work one evening finding his youngest son, Tim, kicking and screaming on the living room floor. He was to start kindergarten the next day and was protesting that he would not go. Stan's normal reaction would have been to banish the child to his room and tell him he just better make up his mind to go. He had no choice, but tonight, recognizing that this would not really help Tim start kindergarten in the best frame of mind, Stan sat down and thought, if I were Tim, why would I be excited about going to kindergarten? He and his wife made a list of all the fun things Tim would do, such as finger painting, singing songs, making new friends. They put them into action. We all started finger painting at the kitchen table with my wife. At the kitchen table, my wife, Lily, my other son, Bob, and myself. All having fun. Soon Tim was peeping around the corner. Next, he was begging to participate. Oh no, you have to go to kindergarten first to learn how to finger paint. With all of the enthusiasm I could muster, I went through the list, talking in terms that he could understand, telling him all the fun telling him all the fun he would have in kindergarten. The next morning, I thought I was the first one up. I went downstairs. I found Tim sitting, sound asleep in the living room chair. What are you doing here? I asked. I'm waiting to go to kindergarten. I do not want to be late. The enthusiasm of our family had aroused in Tim and the eager and wanted that no amount of discussion or threat could have possibly accomplished. Tomorrow, you may want to persuade somebody to do something. Before you speak, pause and ask yourself, how can I make this person want to do it for themselves? This is huge. I think in communication and influence and persuading, whatever, you have to make it that person's ideal. You absolutely have to make it that person's ideal. I think we all have times where we want something from anyone that we're working under, working with, whatever you name it. And we want to just tell them straight up, hey, do this, do that. But if we don't make it their idea and they don't feel involved, it'll never happen. I want to read one quote real quick on page 42. And then we will be on to part 2. All right. This is a quote from Owen D. Young, should I say, a noted lawyer and one of America's great business leaders. And Owen said, people who can put themselves in the place of other people, who can understand the workings of their mind, need never worry about the future and what it has in store for them. I think that is a great way to end this part, because if we always working in the interests of others, also knowing that we need personal needs met, we are human. But if we work and we grind in the interests of others, you will always have a job in whatever economy we're in. You'll always be able to provide and take care of your family and yourself. So I thought that was a pretty cool quote. Principle 3, arouse in the person an eager want. Part 1, fundamental techniques in handling people. in a nutshell, kind of gives all three of the principles. I'll go over them real quick. Don't criticize, condemn, or complain. Give honest and sincere appreciation. Arouse in the other person an eager want. All right. On to part two, and thank you, Jamarcus, for going to give me some water. I'm just talking a lot. All right. Part two, big idea, is 6 ways to make people like you. It's kind of a cringe on that one for me, but it is what it is. I thought it was a pretty good section. So, chapter 1 of part 2. Do this and you'll be welcomed anywhere. All right. It's a pretty good title. All right. Back to the book. You never read a book on psychology, Tippy. You don't need to. You knew by the divine instinct that you can make more friends in 2 months by becoming genuinely interested in other people than you can in 2 years by trying to get people interested in you. Let me repeat that. You can make more friends in 2 months by becoming interested in other people than you can in 2 years by trying to get other people interested in you. This was wrote in 1936, and it still rings very true today. I think we focus on ourselves too much, especially in its new culture where it's do you. And we want influence, and we want followers, and we want genuinely to help others when we don't even focus on others. We focus on ourselves. I have an alert that comes to my phone every Wednesday morning in the middle of the week because I always need to be recentered on this. And I've been having this alert come to my phone every Wednesday from the Reminder app for 2 years now. It says, people are more important than any idea you have. That rings so true in my life because I have tons and tons of ideas, but if I'm not focusing on people, my ideas merely mean nothing. So, I had a quote for the next one is, you have to be interested in people if you want to be a successful storyteller or writer of stories. I probably wrote this down for myself and the person who wants to write books in the future. And storytelling is my weak point. Throughout my whole academics of college, high school, whatever you name it, math was my guy. Math was my favorite subject. So actually, reading this book on this podcast, it's extremely uncomfortable because I abandoned reading so much. I hated reading, and I barely knew how to read. Graduating college, I barely knew how to read. And my friend Carrie, who I know is going to hear this episode, will tell you in our first English composition class that I would fake cry to get out of reading in front of the class because I really couldn't read. Like, I just couldn't. I got so nervous. I didn't want to read in front of people. So when it got to my turn in popcorn reading, I come up with an excuse to get out of it, which is horrible. I'm not telling you that to brag, but writers of stories come hard for me because reading and writing go so hand in hand. So this is something that's very new for me that I'm learning. So I wrote that quote down selfishly for myself. All right, back to the book. Enough about my lack of reading. Here we go. And the next excerpt reads, he pointed to, let me see if I can provide some context on this before I read it. Massachusetts. So, it's a story from a soda clerk who, the reason he got the business or whatnot, I think, but I'm skim reading. And the excerpt goes again. He pointed to a young man at the soda fountain and said that after I had left, the boy had came over and said that I was one of the few salespeople that called on the store that even bothered to say hello to him and to others in the store. He told the owners that if any salesperson deserved his business, I was the owner, and agreed and remained loyal to the customer. I never forgot that To be genuinely interested in other people is the most important quality for a salesperson to possess, for any person, for that matter. I say this to all my people in sales, like myself. Prime example, my job just recommended me for something about a training that I went through and I passed a test, which pretty simple stuff, especially at the age that I am. It's pretty simple test. But I went through it and I passed the test, and my job wanted to recognize all of our salespeople on our Eden Crest team for it. So, and I shared it, and they tagged me in it. And the comment section from friends from high school, from just all walks of my life, college, professional sports, and my current profession, you name it, all of them was in there saying, just congratulations, congratulations. The one comment that stuck out, and it's this principle that I'm breaking down now, to be genuinely interested in other people. And my job is to bring in new people to our community, new seniors, should I say. The seniors in the community, they're already over and done with. I don't even have to talk to them. Actually, the previous company that I used to work for literally told me that. Don't focus on the people inside. They're in. You go get new people. But that's just not who I am to the core. With that being said, the one comment on this Facebook post that I'm talking about was from a family. I just started at this place 2 months ago. A family member who I met probably 4 or 5 times was literally just saying this exact thing. Like, Jjuan is such a light in this community. He's focusing on all the residents that's in here. He's hearing their stories and communicating with them. And I don't say that to brag. I promise I don't say that to brag. I say that to say, focus on people genuinely, because they need that. You know how many people walking around today that don't feel seen at all? Their whole life. They got people in my community that's 80, 90 years old that has never felt seen in their life, or barely felt seen, should I say. Just focus on people and not ourselves, and really listen to people. And especially in my case, talking to seniors, they know so much. I just genuinely learn from them daily. But yeah, I really read that not to brag. All right. Back to the book. Smart excerpt. If we want to make more friends, let's put ourselves out to do things for other people. Things that will require time, energy, unselfishness, and thoughtfulness. Kind of just basically what I was just hitting on. Like, it's going to be uncomfortable, especially if you are like me, who like talking about yourself. To listen to other people, it's uncomfortable. But to genuinely do that, it works tenfold for that person and for yourself. Right back to the book. 61. All right. Here was an offering to buy more fuel without my even suggesting it. I had made more headway in 2 hours by becoming genuinely interested in him and his problem than I could have made in 10 years trying to get him interested to buy my product. So I remember where this excerpt came from, and it's kind of coming out of left field, so I'll explain it real quick. This was a guy who had been for 10 years trying to sell this one manager his product for 10 years. And then one day he genuinely started trying to listen to him and get what was going on with his family life, what was going on like with his kids or whatnot. And the guy finally just reached out to him and like, I'm buying his product. Like, I want to buy from him, because he befriended him. He became a friend first. This is what I will say for my people who are out there doing direct sales. If you don't make a connection with people, everything is relational. So if you go in asking for the sale right away, probably not happening. You got to make some form of relationship. And I'll tell you this world is so small. I'm all the way here in Des Moines, Iowa. The amount of connections I made with people who've been to Beaumont, Texas, or know of Beaumont, Texas, or know of where my wife from, or know where my wife in-laws live. You have to find that connection, but that comes by genuinely asking questions to get to know that other person. This world is small. I'll leave it at that. And principle 1 for part 2, big idea for that chapter. Principle 1 is become genuinely interested in other people. Self-explanatory. You should have knew that was coming. All right. Chapter 2. A simple way to make a good first impression. So this one is basically about smiling. I'll start midway through, just to kind of paint a scenario and ultimately help people smile more. So here goes. He paused for a moment and then he said, I think it was because the manager of the other company spoke on the phone in cold, business-like manner, which made me feel like just another business transaction. Your voice sounded as if you were glad to hear me, that you really wanted me to be a part of your organization. You can assure I am still answering the phone with a smile. The chairman and the board of directors of the largest rubber company in the United States told me that, according to his observation, people rarely succeed at anything unless they're having fun doing it. If you're genuinely not having fun doing what you're doing, it's probably not the right career for you. It's probably not the right friendship for you. It's probably not the right relationship for you. And if you're married, I would suggest counseling. But if you're dating, it's probably not the right relationship for you if you're not having fun. With that being said, the smile. People can feel a smile through the phone. If they can feel a smile through the phone, what do you think they can do when you're in person with them? You'd be surprised. I challenge you, if you're listening, to just go out, enjoy your day, go on a walk. It's beautiful in Des Moines right now, so I'm sure hopefully it's beautiful across the U.S. or wherever you're at. It's beautiful. I challenge you to just go out and smile at everybody you see. And you would notice how many people are not smiling. And maybe they need that. That goes back to the encouragement. Just a fun little challenge for yourself. All right. Excerpt on. Yes, got it. Page 67. All right. This is about happiness. Everybody in the world is seeking happiness. And there is one sure way to find it. That's by controlling your thoughts. Happiness doesn't depend on outward conditions. It depends on inward conditions. I think what he was getting at, because I'm not covering the whole section, is and I'm going to read the famous Martin Luther King quote, we let things that goes on in the outside world control our energy and our temperature so much and our moods. But if you have genuine happiness in your body, doesn't matter what's going on, you'll still find joy in your day. And with that being said, the famous Martin Luther King quote is something along the lines of, I'm going to butcher it, but just like, don't be a thermometer, be the thermostat. The thermometer, we basically let the thermostat control our temperature. But if we're the thermostat in a positive way, because we can be the thermostat in a negative way, then we can keep that genuine happiness no matter what we encounter. Somebody cut you off in traffic, you can still be happy. That's me. I'm never happy when that happens. So I'm preaching to myself at that point. All right. This says in my notes, a Chinese excerpt is a must read for the podcast. It's literally what I wrote down. So let's dive in. The ancient Chinese were a wise lot, wise in ways of the world, and they had a proverb that you and I are to cut out and paste it inside of our hats. It goes like this: a man without a smiling face must not open a shop. Your smile is a messenger of your goodwill. Your smile brightens the lives of all who see it. To someone who has seen a dozen people frown, scowl, or turn their faces away, your smile is like the sun breaking through the clouds, especially when that someone is under pressure from his boss, his customer, his teacher, or parent, or children. A smile can help him realize that all is not hopeless, that there is joy in the world. I'm not going to add anything on that. I don't have anything extra to add to that. And principle 2 is smile. Plain and simple. Simple and plain. All right. Chapter 3. Back to the book. First excerpt is on 75. All right. It says, oh, I should probably give y'all chapter 3 title. Sorry about that. If you don't do this, you are headed for trouble. If you don't do this, you are headed for trouble. The policy of remembering and honoring the names of his friends and his business associates was one secret of Andrew Carnegie's leadership. He was proud of the fact that he could call many of his factory workers by first name, and he boasted that while he was personally in charge, no strikes ever distribute his flaming steel mill. Benton Love, chairman of Texas Commerce of Band Shares, believed that the bigger a corporation gets, the colder it becomes. That's very true, in my opinion. One way to warm it up, he said, is to remember people names. The executive who tell me he can't remember names at the same time telling me he can't remember a significant part of his business and operation is in quicksand. Remember people names, man. Remember people names. I can't tell you how many times I've seen somebody who I genuinely had a real conversation with, and they remember my name, and I'm like, I'm in my head like, oh, how's it going, man? How's it going? I don't know. Yeah, Jamarcus is laughing because he go through that too. Remember people names. It's important. It's another way to make people feel seen. And if you remember their name, I guarantee you they're going to work to remember your name. They're going to work to it. All right. Last excerpt of this small chapter. Franklin D. Roosevelt knew that one of the simplest, most obvious, and most important ways of gaining goodwill was by remembering names and making people feel important. Yet, how many of us do it? How many of us do it? Great question. Great question. Principle 3 is remember that a person's name is to that person the sweetest and most important sound of any language. And let's go back to chapter 1. Everybody have that desire to be important. If you can't remember that person's name, do they think you deem them as important? Absolutely not. All right, chapter 4. Chapter 4 is an easy way to become a good conversationalist. All right. And so thinking of... All right. So I have a small excerpt here. Looks like... Oh, I got another one from this chapter. And so I had him thinking of me as a good conversationalist when in reality I had been merely a good listener and encouraged him to talk. Well, what is the secret, the mystery of a successful business interview? Well, according to former Harvard President Charles W. Eliot, there is no mystery about successful business intercourse. Exclusive attention to a person who is speaking to you is very important. Nothing else is so flattering as that. Are we genuinely listening to people? And I took a short note that said, are we genuinely listening intently to people? I think I got that from this chapter. It's under that chapter. All right. Back to the book. If you want to know how many people shun you and laugh at you behind your back and even despise you, here's the recipe. Never listen to anyone for too long. Talk intensely about yourself. If you have had an idea while the other person is talking, don't wait for him to finish it. Bust right in and interrupt them in the middle of their sentence. How many times do we fall guilty of that? Some people learn by knowing what things that will make people mad and talk about you behind your back. In the last excerpt of this chapter, a person's toothache means more to that person than famine in China, which kills 1 million of people. A boil on his neck interests one more than 40 earthquakes in Africa. Think of that the next time you start a conversation. What people are facing with, their realities are real. Now, it may be real small to us, but it's real to them. If we're not acknowledging that, especially if we want to do something with those people, we're missing the mark. Principle 4, be a good listener. Encourage others to talk about themselves. Stop talking about yourself. Chapter 5, how to interest people. I didn't have any huge takeaways from this chapter, so I did like one thing. It said, I could plainly see that this society was not only a hobby, it was a passion of life. Before I left his office, he sold me a membership to his organization. And I think what he was getting at in this, when I'm trying to skim it over the top to kind of cover that idea that he was talking about. Yeah, I'm not sure. This chapter was really small, and the only thing I wrote down for notes for this chapter was talk in terms of the other person's interests. So I guess in that section, he probably found out what was the guy's passion or whatnot. All right. Chapter 6, moving on. How to make people like you instantly. All right, quick excerpt at the beginning. Oh, yes, I did want something out of that chap. I wanted something priceless, and I got it. I got the feeling that I had done something for him without being able to do anything whatsoever for myself in return. This is the feeling that flows and sings in your memory long after the incident has passed. Always make other people feel important. Back to the book. Back to chapter 1, should I say, on that one. People want to feel important. Sounds like a broken record in this book. Next page. You don't want to listen to cheap, insecure flattery, but you crave sincere appreciation. You want your friends and associates to be, as Charles Sly put it, hearty in their appropriation and lavish in their praise. All of us want that. Talked about that earlier. And lastly, I got a quote from page 99. Every man I meet is superior in some way that I learned from him. Said that at the beginning. So that was a huge theme in this book that we talked about in book club. A couple of us guys, we was a little annoyed that some of the stuff was repeating time after time again, but it was what it was. In a nutshell, the 6 ways to make people like you: become genuinely interested in other people. Smile. Remember that the person name is, to that person, the sweetest and most important sound of any language. Be a good listener. Encourage others to talk about themselves. Talk in terms of other person's interests. Make other people feel important. And do it